I'm going to be following on from the talk that Vidanya did last week about different dimensions of being. And this is part of the whole series that we're doing on the theme of metaphor, myth, and magic. Okay, so last week we saw that people inhabit different worlds, that people inhabit different dimensions according to the nature of their consciousness, according to the nature of their minds, their mental states. And as Vidanya pointed out last week, that's true of everyone. It's true of very ordinary people. That we probably all inhabit rather different worlds from each other. And that also we ourselves inhabit different dimensions at different times in our lives, depending upon our states of mind. And Vidanya was saying, well, that's true of very ordinary people, but it's particularly true of very advanced people. It's particularly true of people who are very developed spiritually and whose states of consciousness, who probably inhabit states of consciousness that we probably, well, we might have had a taste of them, but we can't imagine inhabiting those sorts of states of mind all the time. And so he said last week that the Buddha effectively lived in a different dimension from the dimension that we live in. And so, yeah, he said a little bit about what that state of mind, what that dimension might be like. And probably all of us have had little tastes of that dimension of being. But we kind of go there for a little taste on a good day, whereas the Buddha dwells in those states of mind all the time. So what might that world be like? I guess it would be characterised by serenity, by a lot of warmth and compassion for other beings, by a lot of empathy, of course by a lot of happiness, and the perceptions of an enlightened being would not be coloured as ours are by fear or irritation or defensiveness. They'd be seeing things just as they are. And they'd be able to make choices that weren't tinged by either selfishness or reactivity or the sort of psychological and cultural conditioning that really pushes us in a particular direction, pushes us to act or speak in a particular way. So, okay, the Buddha lives in a different dimension, in a sense, but there's something more to the Buddha than these endlessly positive states of mind. Because a Buddha, an enlightened being, has seen the way that things really are, he or she has broken through the shackles of the material, the conditioned world that we all inhabit, that we all are dealing with every day. So, if you've broken through the conditioned world, if you've seen the way things really are, then actually you're no longer bounded by the conditioned world. And that means you're no longer restricted by things like space and time. So that's why a Buddha is said not to die in the same way that ordinary mortals like us die. The Buddha's body died, his physical body died at parinirvana. His physical body was part of the conditioned normal world that we're all accustomed to. But the Buddha at his enlightenment had transcended the confines of the conditioned world. And the momentum of that achievement continued beyond his physical death in some mysterious way. It is all very mysterious. And Vidanya challenged us to just suspend our disbelief and try out the ideas for size. And so in a way, there were two big ideas from Vidanya's talk last week. There was first of all the idea that there's a sense, or we could say that there's a sense in which the Buddha is still present in some mysterious way because he has broken the bounds of the conditioned world. And the second big idea was that the idea of these different dimensions of being, and the fact that even human beings can inhabit different dimensions of being. Okay, so this week I'm going to take those two ideas and explore a bit how they have been important in the Buddhist world, how they've been important to practicing Buddhists. And then, so those two big ideas. Vidanya actually said last week that we can all get a taste of different dimensions of being. He said that we can visit some of the higher realms of being, the higher realms of the conditioned world, the Rupaloka and the Arupaloka, he mentioned. He said you can visit those worlds in meditation, especially if your meditation is really good, very refined, and you get into dhyana, then there's a sense in which you get a taste of different realms of being. Okay, so some of you guys might be doing that every day in your meditation. And it's great if you can do that, because it is very enjoyable to visit those realms. I don't do it every day in my meditation. I can occasionally, do it occasionally. Usually I can visit those realms if my conditions for meditation are very good. So sometimes if I go away on a retreat, then my meditation really takes off, I get very focused, I get into dhyana, and I have a taste of those different realms. But the busyness of my everyday life means I don't generally have the conditions to get into those states, to reach those worlds. And that has always been a problem for Buddhists. Although many Buddhists have lived monastic lives, completely devoting themselves to practice, an even greater number, all through the ages, have been lay Buddhists like us, who have been practicing Buddhists and have had families and jobs and responsibilities, things that they needed to get on with. Their lives have been very busy. So, the way in which, So the relevance of this is that there are ways, even for busy Buddhists who aren't regularly getting into dhyana, to visit different realms, different dimensions of being. And really that's what tonight's talk is about. So I'm going to talk first about these different dimensions, higher dimensions of being, which are often referred to as Purelands, occasionally as Buddhalands or Buddha fields. They all, in a way, mean the same thing. I'm going to talk about Purelands in the Buddhist tradition, and then I'm going to talk about how they're relevant to us, how they can be helpful to our practice. Okay, so from the very earliest times, the earliest times in the practice of Buddhism, the Buddha was seen as continuing to exist, in a way, even after his physical death. And many Buddhist sutras, the scriptures that are revered in the Buddhist tradition, many sutras focus on this idea, and they speak about the Buddha being constantly present in his Buddha land, in his pure land rather. They talk about the pure land of his consciousness. So there's a sense in which the Buddha is summoning up. He's inhabiting a pure land because of the purity of his mind, the purity of his states of mind. And they talk about the Buddha being constantly present in the pure land that his consciousness has created. And the idea of these pure lands is there in many, many of the Mahayana sutras, which are revered in Central Asia and China and Japan and Korea, the whole area of what's called Northern Buddhism. And their whole basis, they're very central to a particular Buddhist tradition called the Pure Land tradition, which is particularly popular in China and Japan. It's probably the most practiced form of Buddhism in those countries. So just to give you an example, a very famous Mahayana sutra called the Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wonderful Law, or sometimes the White Lotus Sutra for short, talks about the Buddha being constantly present in his Pure Land and constantly teaching the Dharma to those in our realm who can make themselves receptive to it. And I'm going to read you some verses now from the Lotus Sutra, the White Lotus Sutra. In order to save all beings, as a skillful means, I talk about nirvana. But I never enter final nirvana. I remain forever in this world, forever teaching the Dharma, using all my spiritual powers to communicate to beings. When beings have faith, in character upright, in mind gentle, wholeheartedly wishing to see the Buddha, then I, with all the Sangha, appear on Vulture's Peak. If in other regions there are other beings, reverent and with aspiring faith, then I am also with them to teach the supreme Dharma. With my supernaturally pervading power, throughout countless ages, I am always on Vulture's Peak and in every other place. Okay, so they're very lovely verses. They're first of all saying that the Buddha is eternally in the world. He's forever teaching the Dharma. And in a way, the sutra is telling us how to contact the Buddha. It's saying that if we practice ethics, in character upright, in mind gentle, and if we have a sense of shraddha, sense of faith, so when beings have faith, which is the translation is a translation of the word shraddha, and when they wholeheartedly wish to see the Buddha, so we practice ethics, we develop our receptivity to the Buddha in a way, we develop our shraddha, then in a way we're moving towards the Buddha's Pure Land. If we do that, the sutra says, then the Buddha will appear on Vulture's Peak. And I'll come to that in a minute. He'll appear on Vulture's Peak and in every other place. So there's a sense in which it's saying the Buddha's Pure Land is everywhere. It's anywhere that there are people who are receptive to the Buddha's teaching. Okay, so because the Buddha's mind is exceptionally pure, it creates a Pure Land, and it's a dimension of incredible beauty. So another verse from the same sequence in the Lotus Sutra. My Pure Land is eternal and tranquil, filled with heavenly beings, with many parks and palaces, with precious trees full of blossoms and fruit, where beings take their pleasure, and gods evermore make music, showering mandarava flowers on the Buddha and this great assembly. So the Buddha is creating his Pure Land specifically for other beings to dwell in as a kind of dwelling place for other beings. And, if you read the Lotus Sutra, then, you get the impression that the way to get there is through faith, through aspiration to develop spiritually, and through practicing ethics. And if you do that, it's saying, then you'll have a particular connection with the Buddha, and you'll be able to dwell in his Pure Land. So, the tradition that's referred to in the Lotus Sutra is that the Buddha created his Pure Land on Vulture's Peak. Now, Vulture's Peak is a real place in India, and quite a lot of people in this room have been there because the two pilgrimages that have gone from Sheffield Buddhist Centre in 2011 and 2015 both visited Vulture's Peak. So it's a real place. It's a place where the Buddha, the historical Buddha, did actually teach. An actual rocky mountain, I've seen photos of it. It isn't today, I don't think, covered with parks and palaces, and there aren't gods playing music or raining down mandarava flowers. The pictures I've seen show a rocky mountain summit and an awful lot of people going up and down it. An awful lot of pilgrims, Buddhist pilgrims from all over the world. So the Vulture's Peak that is referred to in the Lotus Sutra isn't the actual physical place of Vulture's Peak. It's a mythical realm. Vulture's Peak is meant to stand for something. It's meant to stand for being in the sphere of influence of the Buddha, being around the Buddha, being so close to the Buddha that you can kind of experience his states of mind and catch them a little bit from him. And actually one of the reasons that that's important to us is that we can imagine the Buddha not as a human being who lived and died 2,500 years ago, which in a way is kind of not that relevant to us, but as mysteriously or mythically present right here and now, someone in whose sphere of influence we can sit. And when we make a connection with the Buddha, when we aspire to our highest ideals, he represents, if we aspire to the ideals that the Buddha represents, then in a way we're moving closer to him, we're moving into his sphere of influence, into his dimension of being, into his Pure Land. Okay, so it's not far-fetched because, as Vidanya said last week, we all know people that it is really great to be around, people whose positive states of mind just put us in a good mood, who just seem to spread positivity and happiness and generosity through being around and interacting with other people. And the Buddha was obviously like that, but on steroids. If you see what I mean. Traditionally, Buddhas and advanced bodhisattvas, so not just the historical Buddha, but any of the archetypal Buddhas and bodhisattvas are regarded in the Buddhist tradition as creating Buddha lands by virtue of their enlightened consciousnesses. And beings with a connection with any particular Buddha or bodhisattva can dwell in the sphere of influence, can dwell in the Pure Land of that figure. And as I said earlier, that's very important in many Buddhist traditions, certainly in the Mahayana traditions, especially in Pure Land Buddhism. So I'm going to talk next about one of the most famous Pure Lands, and that's the Pure Land of Sukhavati. Sukhavati means land of bliss. Sukhavati, forget the end bit for a minute. Sukha means pleasure or bliss. Vati must mean land, because Sukhavati is the land of bliss. And the land of bliss, Sukhavati, is the mythical abode of the Buddha Amitabha. And I'm going to read some snippets of some quite long sutras called the Sukhavati Vyuha Sutras. Vyuha means kind of vision. So there are two sutras, one quite long, one shorter, called the Sukhavati Vyuha Sutras. So here's the first snippet. O Ananda, the world called Sukhavati, belonging to the Bhagavat Amitabha, Bhagavat is a Buddha, is prosperous, rich, good to live in, fertile, lovely, and filled with many gods and men. Then Ananda, in that world there are neither hells, nor the animal realm, nor the realm of departed spirits, nor bodies of fighting spirits, nor untimely births. And there do not appear in this world such gems as are known in the world of Sukhavati. Now, Ananda, that world Sukhavati is fragrant with sweet-smelling scents, rich in manifold flowers and fruits, adorned with gem trees, and frequented by flocks of sweet-voiced birds, which have been made by the Buddha on purpose. And Ananda, the roots, trunks, branches, twigs, leaves, flowers, and fruits of all those trees are pleasant to touch and fragrant. And when those trees are moved by the wind, a sweet and delightful sound proceeds from them, never tiring, never disagreeable to hear. So that's just a very short section of the longer Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra. It goes on like this at great length, pages and pages and pages of it. On a retreat I went on last year, we actually read through the whole sutra, and I think it took 10 readings of about 40 minutes each. So I'm not going to read you the whole lot. But you get the idea. Sukhavati is a really great place. It's a world of beauty and serenity and happiness. It'd be a lovely dimension to dwell in. So in the Pureland Buddhist traditions, Buddhist practitioners actually practice contemplating the beauty of Sukhavati and kind of cultivating a longing to be reborn there. The Sukhavati Vyuha Sutras are extended reflections, even many think guided meditations, on the qualities of Amitabha's Pure Land. And when you read them or listen to them being recited, you enter the states of mind of the Buddha Amitabha. And you see reality as the fully enlightened being Amitabha would see it, as just full of beauty and wonder. So for Pure Land Buddhists, contemplating Sukhavati is the equivalent of visiting the meditative dhyanic realms, the Rupaloka and the Arupaloka that Anya mentioned. And as you can probably imagine, that's a practice that's more accessible than dhyanic meditation might be to people who are living in the world of families and work. So in a way, it's a very practical way of trying to inhabit a different dimension of being. And crucially, the Pure Land is a place where you can hear and practice the Dharma very, very easily. In the shorter Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, the Buddha tells Sariputra that there are 3 kinds of birds in Sukhavati. There are Hamsa geese. Apparently, that's not an actual bird, it's a mythical bird, but you know what geese are like. There are curlews, and there are peacocks. Now, geese and curlews and peacocks, they're all birds that have very plaintive, sort of atmospheric calls. Quite haunting cries, really. Anyway, in Sukhavati, these 3 types of birds, I'm quoting now, they fly down and sing together in harmony, each one in their unique voice. When they sing, their voices proclaim the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 spiritual powers, and the 7 factors of awakening. Okay? So even those rather dry lists that you might think, oh, well, that sounds a bit dry, they're sung with great beauty by these amazing birds. And they're pleasant to listen to and easy to absorb, easy to learn and easy to practice. And it says, and when they hear the song of the peacocks, the minds of the living beings who dwell there become absorbed by the Buddha, absorbed by the Dharma, absorbed by the Sangha. Okay, so in Sukhavati, it's easy to hear the Dharma. In the longer sutra, the rivers are said to produce a delightful and melodic sound, which is said to be profound, ungraspable, unfathomable, and pure. It is a delight to the ear and it touches the heart. It's enchanting, delightful, and it soothes the mind. It's agreeable and appealing to listen to, murmuring impermanence, peace, no self. It brings happiness to those who hear it, and it reaches the ears of all living beings in that world system. Okay, so that's a much more subtle approach to the Dharma than the lists like 5 spiritual faculties. The rivers are murmuring a beautiful sound that everybody hears and everybody loves hearing. And they're whispering impermanence, peace, no self. All sort of dharmic concepts that you can, in the land of Sukhavati, reflect on and absorb and understand very, very easily. So the effect of a world like that is, of course, completely transformative to the people who live there, to the beings who live there. And in one of these sutras, a longer sutra, there's a wonderful but quite long description of the beings who do live in Sukhavati. And I'm going to read part of it. I won't read the whole thing because, like the descriptions, it's very long. So it says, moreover, Ananda, the living beings who've been born in that Buddha field in Sukhavati, they have no perception of anything as belonging to others, no perception of anything as belonging to themselves, no perception of inequality, no division, no conflict, no hostility. They have minds of equality. I think it means equanimity. They have minds of loving kindness, gentle minds, affectionate minds, diligent minds, clear minds, stable minds, unhindered minds, unshaken minds, unagitated minds, minds which practice the perfection of wisdom. They have the kind of intellect that allows them to remember their own thoughts. Wouldn't that be nice? And then it goes on for several pages like that. And I'm just going to pick out one more thing because I really liked it. And the one more thing that I especially liked was, playfully, they sing songs of the factors of awakening. And I just like it that beings in Sukhavati can be playful about their practice. And I think that our Sangha's quite good at emulating that by playing silly games on Sangha Day and having pantomimes and sports days and things like that. So Dharma practice doesn't have to be deadly serious. It should be fun, really. Okay, so the Sukhavati Sutras talk about beings being reborn in the land of bliss, reborn in Sukhavati. And the idea of rebirth in a Pure Land is really important. It's a really important part of the Pure Land myth. And in a way, it's the key. But we're not being invited here to be good so that we can go to a Pure Land, go to heaven when we die. We're being invited to a spiritual rebirth in which we inhabit a different dimension, in which we inhabit an enlightened dimension, the sort of dimension that the Buddha Amitabha inhabits. And in a way, that's the key to the relevance of the Pure Land myth for us and for our practice as Buddhists. Because the principle behind the idea of the Pure Land doesn't just apply to great beings like Amitabha. We all help to co-create the world around us by our mental states. We can't help but do that. Our states of mind and the way we play them out, the way we act in the world, will influence, will create the world that we inhabit. And when there's a group of us together, as there are here tonight at Sangha Night, then we're co-creating a world. We're jointly creating a world. Okay, so we all co-create worlds around us by our mental states. So that means that we individually and collectively, can create a relatively pure, mini Pure Land within the wider society that we live in. So, and that's true even at work or at home. We individually can speak and act in a way that makes our environment more like a mini Pure Land. But if several of us are working together or living together and really practicing in that context, then we really do have a chance of changing that mini world and taking it closer to the Pure Land ideal. Which is why, of course, in this Buddhist Centre, just through that door, and in several houses in Walkley and its environment, there are communities of Buddhists who are living together and working together to create mini Purelands. Their ideal is to create ideal conditions for Buddhist practice, to help each other practice. And it's why a number of people here are also planning to set up and open a Buddhist cafe in which a number of Buddhists from this Sangha will be working together. Working together with Buddhists is another way of creating a Pure Land. And hopefully they'll create a mini Pure Land for the people who come to the cafe and attract lots and lots of people to spend their money there. And of course, that Pure Land that they're creating up there in Crooks is going to need lots of help. So if you want to get a bit of a taste of working with other Buddhists, then you might want to have a word with Dayavajra or Rachel or Jenny Owen or Grant and ask them whether you can come and volunteer, help to set up the cafe, set up the Pure Land, and just help to keep it going on a regular basis. They're going to need volunteer help for that. Okay, so those teams, those communities, they're all quite small. But at Sangha night, we generally have anything from 40, 50, up to 70 or 80 people here in this hall and practicing together. And in Sheffield Buddhist Centre, there are probably several hundred of us, 500 maybe, people who are practicing together. And Sangharachita, the founder of our movement, encourages us to think of our centre and our Sangha as a mini Pure Land, and to see the creation of a Pure Land as a really important part of our practice. And in a way, what you all experience at Sheffield Buddhist Centre is the result of that. But it's not new for Buddhists to be advised to make their practice creating a Pure Land. It's been a practice for generations of Buddhist practitioners for 2.5 millennia. And you won't be surprised to discover that there's a list describing how to do it. And the list rejoices in the wonderful name of the Samgrahavastams, which is up here. So the 4 Samgrahavastams, it means something like means of unification, but it's generally taken as the list of how you build Sangha, how you build a Buddha land, how you create a Pure Land. And it's a list of practices that were described by the historical Buddha's disciple, Hataka. So this goes right back to the time of the Buddha. Hataka, having become a follower of the Buddha, sets about spreading the Dharma in his own area of India, which is one that the Buddha visits very rarely. It's kind of out of the Buddha's usual sort of annual round of where he does his teaching. So he only goes there once every several years. And the Buddha visits, Hatha becomes a disciple, the Buddha goes off, doesn't visit again for several years, and meanwhile, Hataka gets on and spreads the Buddha's teaching. And the next time the Buddha goes to visit Hataka, several years later, he's amazed to find that there is a Sangha of 500 people practicing with Hataka. And he's full of admiration and says to Hataka, "Well, how did you do it?" And Hataka said, "Well, I only did what you told me." The answer he gives are these 4, this list of 4 Samgrahavastus, which in, just trying to remember now, is this Sanskrit? It's Sanskrit, I think.
Yes, it's
Sanskrit? Yeah, thank you. Dana, Priyavadita, Arthacharya, and Samanarthata, and which mean generosity, kindly speech, beneficial activity, and exemplification. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about those. Because they were not only worked for Hataka, they were subsequently recommended by the Buddha as ways for building Sangha. And in a way, they're a very practical way of building a Pure Land. So how can we build a Pure Land? Well, we can be generous. Of course, living in a Pure Land is priceless. You can't pay admission to a Pure Land. There's no entrance fee. Money couldn't buy it, really. You can only get in free. And you can only get in free based on the generosity of other people. And if you want to, you can kind of join in that cycle of generosity and be part of creating the Pure Land yourself. So how can you do that? Well, you can bring nice food to the Potato Club, as many of you do. You can help one another in practical ways with lifts to the centre, lending books, giving cards and presents to each other on the least excuse or on no excuse at all. We can take out that standing order to pay the living expenses of the people who run this centre. You heard a few weeks ago that we're still, I think, a couple, maybe 3,000 short of the total that we need to be getting in standing orders next year. So if you were thinking of giving out a standing order, it would be a great practice of generosity and a very useful one. And in a way, this whole centre is an act of generosity. It was bought with donated money. It's run by volunteers and by people who work only for living expenses. No one gets a salary for running this centre or for teaching here. It offers the Dharma as an act of generosity. Okay, so you can build a Pure Land through generosity. You can build a Pure Land through kindly speech. How can we do this? We can tell people that we like them. Well, it's very simple, isn't it? We can rejoice in their merits. We can sympathise when they're having a hard time. We can encourage them when they're flagging. For many people, it's actually the kindly speech that attracted them to the Buddhist Centre in the first place. A mitra I know, she's not here tonight actually, said she actually didn't trust it to begin with when she came to the centre. She was on the lookout for kind of behind-the-scenes snide remarks and gossip. And when she discovered it just wasn't there, she was completely sold on our Sangha and asked to become a mitra. And actually, kindly speech doesn't always mean nicey-nicey speech. Okay? Sometimes it actually involves straight talking about difficult issues, or it can involve giving feedback that will be difficult for someone to hear. Which is why there's such a hugely strong emphasis on skillful communication in our Sangha, and in our whole movement, indeed. Difficult things do need to be said sometimes, but they need to be said with kindness and tact at the right time and in the right way. Okay, so we can be generous, we can speak to people kindly, we can engage in beneficial activity. We can help on the newcomers courses to introduce people to the Dharma and the Sangha. We can help around the centre to keep our Pure Land clean and in good repair. We can help in the garden to create the really beautiful environment that we've got outside. We can organise environmental activities with the earth cooler. We can take part in family activities with the families cooler. Or we can decide that we're going to help raise lots and lots of money at the summer fair, which is the 25th of June next year, I think. Wants to do their diaries. And then finally, we can exemplify. Exemplification is an odd one, actually. The word is sometimes translated as consistency. So this is about acting in a way that is consistent with, or that exemplifies our values, our ideals. In a way, it's about practicing what we preach, except that we try not to preach, of course. But this is very much about living by our ideals, practicing the precepts, working on our states of mind in meditation, practicing mindfulness, and practicing metta, being kind to other people. And there is something, you probably noticed this, there is something very inspiring about observing people living from their strong ideals. And changing themselves and changing the world around them. You, all of you individually, are probably inspiring to other people when you're acting at your best. I'm constantly inspired by seeing people here come along, make big changes in their lives, and, well, just have an impact on the world. And actually, that was one of the things that first attracted me to getting involved with the Sangha here in the first place. I just wanted a bit of what I saw in the people that had already been practicing here for many years. So the Samagraha Vastus are the means of unification, the recommended ways of building a Buddha land. Okay, so the Buddha land, the Pure Land, is the myth or metaphor for, in a way, the ideal spiritual community. It's a model for the world, for a dimension that we can collectively co-create as a Sangha. It's a dimension in which we can all thrive, a dimension in which we give each other ideal conditions for practicing the Buddha's path. And different Buddhist traditions have focused on the pure lands of particular Buddhas or Bodhisattvas. We've heard about Vulture's Peak and Amitabha's Pure Land, the land of bliss. There are also very detailed descriptions of many other Pure Lands in other Buddhist sutras. Certainly there are sutras about the Pure Lands of Akshobhya and Maitreya, and then references to the Pure Lands of many other Buddhas. And in our own movement, we've heard that Sangharakshita, founder of the Triratna Buddhist order and community, recommends us thinking of our own Sangha or centre as a mini Pure Land. He also recommends that we think of ourselves as the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara. And those two myths are very closely connected. Many of you will remember seeing and discussing the lovely tanka that we've got of the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara on an intermediate course when you did that. And those of you who came to Sangha Day recently will have seen that tanka again at Sangha Day, that side of the shrine, I think it was. So Avalokiteshvara is a Buddha of compassion who has 1,000 arms and 11 heads, in order to be able to see and respond to the needs of all beings. So individually, of course, we can only do a limited amount to help other beings, but acting together, acting as a movement, we can have a beneficial effect on the world. So in a way, the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara is a very appropriate symbol for us to aspire to. So the myth of Triratna is that of the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara co-creating mini Pure Lands wherever there's a centre or a Sangha practicing. And perhaps eventually working towards transforming what traditionally Buddhists refer to as this whole Saha world. Saha means to endure or to bear something. So the Saha world is the world of endurance, and in the Buddhist tradition, that's where we live. We live in the Saha world, the world of endurance. And so our myth, the myth of Triratna, is that by building Pure Lands, we can eventually transform this whole Saha world into a Pure Land that could be as wonderful as Sukhavati. Okay, and so this talk, which I'm just coming to the end of, is part of a series on metaphor, myth and magic. And so, yeah, my suggestion is that we let the myth work its magic on us, that we enter into the spirit of the myth of the Pure Land. We act as if our practice can collectively create a Pure Land for the benefit of other people and ourselves. A realm in which beings have everything they need to develop spiritually. A world in which there are, as in Sukhavati, no hell realms or realms of hungry ghosts. A world in which all beings are receptive to beauty, are generous, speak kindly to each other, care for each other. A world in which it's easy to hear and understand the Dharma and to practice it, and to make very speedy progress towards enlightenment. So individually, that might be unattainable, an unattainable ideal, we might think. Perhaps not, perhaps you don't think so. But if we act collectively, think global, act local, you could say, we can actually make something happen by practicing the Samgraha Vastriyas with our friends and our fellow practitioners right here at the Sheffield Buddhist Centre. So thank you for listening.